Stuart Nash.
Mr Chair. You know, the interesting thing, Mr Chair, is there's general agreement across the House, through the House, that the LAQ regime has probably been abused a little bit. And the substantial part of this SOP, as has been mentioned by my colleague Honourable David Cunliffe and the Minister, deals with LAQCs. It's a large part of this. And the Minister talked about a process about, you know, this was signalled in the budget, and we know that, we accepted that, and that he consulted widely, and we know that, and we understand that, we accept that. And this SOP is a result of that consultation. But, Mr Chair, I suppose where we have great difficulty here is this is how all tax bills sort of start and come to the genesis. You know, it's announced somewhere, a minister comes up with a working group or suggestion, or, you know, it's flagged somewhere that change needs to occur. So what happens is there are papers written. I mean, Mr Chair knows the process better than I do, but it gets consultation with the IRD and it goes out and it comes back, and what happens is the result of that is a bill that's drafted. And we totally accept that, and the Minister has followed the right process right up to this point. However, the process is only about half completed when it gets to that, when it gets to this massive SOP, which is actually, Mr Chair, larger than the bill itself. It's larger than the bill itself at 74 pages. In fact, it's larger than all but 2 of the 9 tax bills that have come before this House in this term. So it's quite a massive SOP, and there is a lot of detail in here. And I suppose my concern is when this sort of SOP goes out for consultation to tax experts, that's all very well, but what about New Zealanders who will be affected by this? And as the Minister pointed out, there are about 130 active loss attributing qualifying companies. And my understanding is that, and I think we got this from the officials, that there are a lot more than just 50% that are used to shelter rental properties, but that doesn't matter. The bottom line is there are a lot of these, they have exploded, and they are used so people can minimise their tax. And what this bill does is make changes. But I suppose where I'm coming from, where my colleagues are coming from, is we need to complete the rest of the process to allow us to have robust legislation. And I suppose Clause 74 of the SOP, subclause 6C, it says the definition of LAQC is repealed. The definition of LAQC is repealed. So immediately, 130,000 companies, or I don't know how many shareholders are in these, but there are a lot of New Zealanders that are affected by this. An incredible amount of New Zealanders that are affected by this. The following is inserted in appropriate alphabetical order. Look through company. So this isn't a small SOP that's going to affect about 10 people. This makes huge changes to tax legislation, Mr Chair, and this is our point. If it had gone to the Select Committee, we had had our independent advisor, we had been able to question officials, because we have a lot of questions around this. We're not necessarily saying it's wrong. We are aware, for example, that the officials put forward 2 proposals to the Minister about how to deal with LAQCs. This is only one of them. The other one was to actually remove LAQCs from legislation altogether. And we would like to know, why wasn't this considered? And these are the sort of questions we, as members of Parliament who are elected by New Zealanders to represent them, could have put to this Select Committee and put to the officials and asked our independent tax expert, because as I mentioned, there is no one on that Finance and Expenditure Select Committee that is a tax expert. And we acknowledge that. That's why we have Ms Turner in there representing us and helping us out. But there are a number of questions we could have asked with regard to this. That is where our concern comes in. And I talked about a number of questions we asked, and the Minister said there's about $800 million that's lost from the rental property market by the use of LAQCs. I do know that LAQCs in general in 2008 took about $2.2 billion out of tax receipts. That's a substantial amount of money. And even if, as the Minister said, maybe only half of LAQCs are held to, operate to, in fact, shelter rental properties, then even if it's only $1.1 billion, that is a substantial amount of money by anyone's reckoning. I mean, when we talk about making cuts to, $13 million from night classes, this isn't a substantial amount of money, Mr Chair. Some of the questions that I really would have liked to ask in Select Committee, and I would like to ask the Minister actually, is The IRD said there are about two, but Mr Chair. Good choice, Mr Chair, thank you very much. And I do accept that the Minister did say that these changes were signalled in the budget. Clawing back depreciation, I think, will make a big change. And, we supported that. However, why didn't the government simply ring-fence losses to do with rental properties as opposed to put in this look-through company where people can still offset their income against losses made in the LAQC? I know that what the structure does allow is it takes away any sort of arbitrage between the LAQC rate and the tax rate, and that is where all the losses came through. It removes that, and that's not a bad thing. But I'm not a tax expert, Mr Chair, and I would have loved to have heard the reasons and the rationale behind that. We get briefing papers from the IRD like you would not believe. They arrive in forests. But what it does allow us to do is get our heads around the rationale behind this bill. I want to know why people were using LAQCs to hold their rental properties and why they weren't using other types of entities, why they weren't using the company entity, why they just didn't hold it themselves. Because what we're talking about fundamentally here is losses. We understand that look-through companies mean that people have to attribute profits from these companies to their marginal tax rate. But why were they using LAQCs for losses? Surely the company structure would have allowed that. Surely just holding it as an individual would have allowed that. I know the arguments around liability, but these are questions that I would have liked to have asked. What are the practical impacts of the changes to the LAQ regime? Is this going to affect the amount of rental housing out there? We know the market is very, very soft at the moment. Any real estate agent will tell you this. I was talking to a lawyer last night who deals in property, and he said it has just dried up. And I suspect, well, he said one of the reasons are the changes that are made. We talked about the LAQC, and he said there are probably changes that need to be made, but when I asked him what sort of changes, he was sort of umming and ahhing. And this is a lawyer who deals with this legislation as part of his job every day. This is why I say, Mr Chair, that the Minister took the SOP to a certain point in the process, but he needed to take it further. Now, a look-through company. The Minister says the bill was made available to the public on Tuesday. Now, I would like to ask any member who has, well, anyone who's watching, I know we can't refer to people on the TV, do they know what a look-through company means? Did anyone have the time? Was anyone aware, was this sort of published as a half-page ad in the Herald, that LAQCs were no longer going to exist? This was going to be a look-through company? I wonder if any of the experts that the Minister consulted published in their newsletters there is going to be an SOP that is going to come before the House, before Christmas, they'll get rid of LAQCs. I very much doubt it. But submitters would have had the opportunity. There's about a 5-week lead time we normally allow for tax bills for the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee. It goes out in a whole lot of ads so people can look at the ad and make a conscious decision around whether they want to have their say on this. But I doubt there are many people, Mr Chair, remember 130,000 LAQCs, 130,000. Of those people who were shareholders in those LAQCs, I doubt whether any, if there are any, a small fraction of those 130,000 actually know what a look-through company is. They actually know what a look-through company is. I very much doubt that, Mr Chair. This is what the Select Committee process would have been able to bring out in the open and provide consultation on. And of course release documents. There have been documents out there, they have been signalled, but this SOP was not signalled, Mr Chair, and I think it's the reasonable expectation of the vast majority of New Zealanders that any form of tax legislation that, with a drop of a hammer wipes out 130,000 legal entities should be open for public consultation. I doubt there is any member in this House who wouldn't agree that if you suddenly did away with 130,000 of anything, if Parliament did that, then there shouldn't be some level of public input, not expert input, public input. This SOP is bigger than the bill. That is what we have a major concern about. No one can get their head around this. A look-through company, we understand what look-through companies are now because we've had a briefing from the officials. We sort of have a feel of the consequences, but we don't know what they all are at all, Mr Chair. But I'm keen to know, did the government look at any other changes? Did the Minister consider or take any